My name is Michael Manning. I work for Cozy Vacation Rentals here in Fredericksburg, Texas. The STR business has changed my life because prior to this, through some of my own doing and others that I had no control over, I was financially dead. I was working daily for food. Some days there was no food. This job came along and started putting food on my table and my mother's table, and it was a godsend. And that's why one of the reasons I'm so passionate about my job is for that very fact. I do stand for Fredericksburg. To me, there's no better place.
My name is Lisa Smith, and I have been in the Fredericksburg area about 25 years. My kids go to school here. They were all raised here, and I am a single mother. I'm raising 3 girls, and this job provides the financial means for me to be able to do so. And being able to have the opportunities to move up within the company, I am now able to not live paycheck to paycheck. So it is very important. I have girls in college right now, and this means the world to us. It's everything. We have a lot of girls that are single mothers, and this is how we put food on our table and we provide for our kids. It's the job itself that gives us that sense of security and makes us feel safe, and we have satisfaction in the job that we do, and a job well done every day. It affects us on a personal level as well. My family and I stand for Fredericksburg. We are Fredericksburg.
My name is Jen Traver, and I was born and raised in Fredericksburg. My parents had a restaurant on Main Street called Ingles Deli for over 30 years, and so I was raised in the family business, and tourism even back then was such a huge part of my upbringing. We decided to turn our personal home into a B&B, and we moved into a rental. And our family thought we were crazy, but we knew that that would provide some additional income. And so really what I encourage people to understand about STR owners is that we are not all uber wealthy people who are looking to make money off of this town. A lot of us are local families just, trying to make a good living for our family. We live here, we're local, we were raised here, we want to raise our children here, our kids go to school here, and Fredericksburg is the greatest town in Texas, and we're so thankful to be able to live here, and our STR helps us be able to do so.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. I hope everybody got through the crazy weather we had last Thursday. Who would imagine Texas ices over like that twice in 2 years in a row? So appreciate everybody coming out here. I think we probably lost maybe a couple people, but overall we have an amazing turnout. Just want to thank everybody for the time, effort, and energy. We have a lot of auspicious folks in the audience tonight. We have some, of course, our mayor, city council, planning and zoning. So we have some very special guests here. Mr. Kyle Biederman also is joining us, and a number of other folks. My name is Randy Briley, and along with a number of other people in the room here, I'd like to ask the STR Alliance officers to stand up, please. Milton Buckaloo. Jeffrey Morin, I just saw you over there. Jeff's in the back. Belinda McDonald. Belinda is the wizard behind the curtain. That's all I will say. Leslie Spraggins, there you are. And Nancy Herndon. Nancy is behind the scenes also working. She's not here physically present with us, but I just want to give her a shout out for all the hard work she's done with us as well. Appreciate all of that. One thing to know, a lot of you have seen us at council meetings and online and things of that nature. We all live here. We are all residents. This was formed solely by individuals that live in the city proper, that care about this town on both sides of the aisle, whether it's neighborhoods, economies, churches, hospitals. We live here. This impacts all of us. So I want to make sure everybody knows that. So I want to thank all the leadership for your thoughtfulness, your incredible wisdom, and friendship that we've formed in the last 10 months working on this very important subject. I also want to thank our amazing members. I think we're tracking close to 1,000 members now, paid members, and also people that are following us as well. So I think what we're trying to do here is striking a nerve, hopefully in a good way. So I want to thank everybody watching online. I know we're live streaming YouTube and Facebook tonight as well. I also want to extend a special thank you to the mayor, City Council, Planning and Zoning, and to our residents on both sides of this conversation. I think it's important to have a balanced conversation. At the end, we're going to ask questions, and if you have a question, and quite frankly, you're hesitant about STRs, or quite frankly, you don't care for them, we still want to hear your voice. It's important. So I would ask for that participation, please. This is a passionate subject. We've talked about this, and I know sometimes tempers can get the best of us. I've spoken to individuals on both sides of the aisle on this subject, and I'm asking for a civil conversation, and I'm confident that we will have that. Occasionally, people ask me, why in the world am I involved in this conversation with STRs to begin with? I have one STR at the moment, and I have to say that I retired early with the help of my lovely bride. Where is Charlotte sitting? Way in the back by the wine bar. That's never happened before. But I retired early to be a present father. I was a road warrior exec. I was on the road all the time, and I had to show my driver's license on Thursdays when I came back home, and it wasn't fair to my wife or my kids. So I got off the road, and I figured out if I could put together a financial plan, and I call it financial dog paddling. I'll sell a book if you're interested in it. We don't make a ton of money doing this, but we keep our heads above water. So, and also to be a present father and available caretaker for an aging parent. My father-in-law, who is one of the most awesome guys in the world, excuse me, was a part of that. I share this because making a difficult life decision is just that, it's difficult. My story is unique to me, but my path to STR ownership really isn't. I've met so many people in this room that have done the same thing I've done, supplementing their incomes. I've met young couples that have just had a child and they're renting out an apartment to help afford to live here. This is the best place in the world to live, in my opinion, and I'd rather be nowhere else but here. So I want to make sure people understand. There was a young lady that was just speaking about the fact that STR owners, we are not all uber rich people. That is a very, very true statement. In my career, I was responsible for a number of business units within the technology sector, Motorola probably most notably that you all would know of. And we always operated with something called due diligence. And due diligence, very, very simply put, is looking at all things when making a big decision. And I look at my daughter who just went to college recently. When we were looking at schools, we looked at curriculum costs. We looked at football teams maybe. And most importantly, how far away are they and they can't come home every weekend. That's due diligence. So in the case of here, occasionally I was looking at acquiring companies or maybe divesting companies, and that's just the course of business, what we do. You look at all the risks and benefits when you make a major decision, whether it's in a corporate world or in your family budget, quite frankly, or in our hometown, and we think this is a very important conversation. Regarding funding of this, we've taken a tin cup approach to this whole effort. This has all been raised, all the funds have been raised by neighbors, by friends, by family, and small businesses here in Fredericksburg, Texas. None of this has been funded by large corporations floating out in the ether or large LLCs or anything like that. These are small family businesses. This is how we funded it. This conversation is that important to us. That's why we've done this. It's critical to be proactive and look at all the impacts that impact our economy, our jobs, our housing markets, average wages. We talk about affordable housing, which is a passionate subject that we need to solve and resolve for this town. and it's something that's critically important to us as well. All of our staff members work here. We need them to be healthy, happy in homes that work for them. So it's a critical part of our ecosystem as well. Lastly, we believe that a balance can be struck for quality of life, neighborhoods, and the managed growth of our economy. So we do believe there's a balance, and I use the word compromise. Sometimes people don't like that, but I do believe there's a balance and a compromise to reach the goals that we all want to see happen. So we're all neighbors and citizens of this wonderful town, and I know that we can come together on this and have a civil conversation and look forward to learning something new about your town that you probably didn't know, thanks to the hard work of the extended team here and also our staff that are up here as well. So with that, I'll touch on the agenda. So if I could get a slide flip. So Matt Curtis will be our MC as I step off here, and Matt is the founder of Smart City Policy Group, founded in Austin, Texas. And he is a short-term rental industry expert. He covers North America and possibly Canada, I'm not quite sure, but he has a lot of experience, many years working on this subject. We've worked on it for about 10 months. We've owned for 5 years, but he does this full time. Very, very fortunate to have Mr. John Hawkins with us, president of TXP. He's an economist on retainer. I couldn't fit all of it in there because I think it's like every major city in Texas, pretty much, except for Greene, I think. He's also, very impressive to me, was aide, and yes, I did misspell it, to the British Parliament. So I thought that was pretty interesting, having that type of experience on a global basis. So thank you for coming in, John. We appreciate it. Mr. Lee Leffingwell is also here, former mayor of Austin, Texas, 2009, 2012. We're very honored to have your presence here and your knowledge and experience in this conversation. Mr. Jeff Coffey over here as well. Jeff is an impressive individual. If you have some time, chat with all these folks. But he also managed and negotiated the Buda Cabela's operation, which is my favorite store in the whole wide world, next to Street Dreams, but that's a different conversation. At the tail end of this, Milton Buckaloo will come back up, and we want to facilitate questions. So I think we have a couple of canned questions maybe, but Milton's going to kind of facilitate a conversation. Again, we look for hard conversations or hard questions, but we want to have an open dialogue here, so I'll touch on that. Milton will touch on that at the end. Next slide, please. Sponsors, these are the hometown companies that have helped us out. So Cozy is a diamond sponsor. They've been instrumental here in helping us make this happen, along with Absolute Charm, Guesthouse Schmidt, Vacasa, Heavenly Host, and several other local companies that have worked with us on this as well. Time, effort, energy, resources, and yes, dollars went into this, and we want to thank our hosts. So thank you for that. Next one, please. And also, we put out a call to have a venue, and quite frankly, I was thinking probably a tent somewhere, but you know, who can complain, right? So, Mr. Mickey Poole. We simply couldn't have a more beautiful venue or a more gracious host to have us here, so I want to extend our sincere appreciation for all of that. So with that, next slide, please. We're going to introduce Mr. Matt Curtis, the president of Smart City Policy Group.
Thank you. Thanks, Randy. Good job. Is this working okay? Anybody go to North Texas? Anybody? So, yeah, so a couple hands. You probably know me. I was the 1993 Denton Citywide Karaoke Champ. So, I hope you can all hear me. I know that you, of course, heard about my win. Can you guys hear me okay in the back? Sound okay? Great, great. First off, it is an incredible venue. Did anybody try the Mourvedre? I believe that's how you're pronouncing it correctly. Hands, anybody? You can admit it. It's really good. I tried it the last time I was here. Mickey is doing great work out here, and it's a really spectacular place. I want to start off by mentioning something to you before I kind of dive into getting the night started. This is rare. This does not happen. And I think I mentioned this the last couple times I spoke to council, but you may have some instances where property owners, property managers of vacation rentals will coalesce and try to do something in a coordinated manner to help the city council and help the community come up with a solution. But not like this. And you just have to take my word for it. I've done this for over a decade now. I've done this worked on this issue around the world. I used to be part of the industry. It was a little bit of a different story back then. And then I've been off on my own consulting on this issue for over 5 years now. And this just doesn't happen. So you should be very, very proud of, as a community, again, to Randy's point, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, no matter what side of the spectrum that you're on this issue, this doesn't happen. You guys really did a great job of having real community engagement, to facilitated dialogue, to try to bring together information so that you can create good public policy. So anyway, feel good as a community about that. Fredericksburg did something that the biggest cities in America, around the world, have never done. You guys had a really good, facilitated, engaged discussion on this issue. Yeah, right. Give yourself a whoop whoop for that. Nobody asked me, by the way, what the songs were for the North Texas thing. I'll be around after the show if you guys would like to discuss that. So, Randy did a moment of introducing me, but it's kind of an interesting story. I was the aide to Mayor Leffingwell, and before that, Mayor Wynn. I worked for city council. I'm a city guy. I'm a local government guy. I'm from a small town that, frankly, doesn't exist anymore. I'm from Round Rock, Texas, which, when I graduated from Round Rock, I think the population was about 18,000, and now it's a lot bigger. So, it's still a great city, but it was very different. I grew up in a tiny town. And I love the importance of local government. I think local government is truly important. It's where the rubber meets the road. Kent and I know each other from other spectrums of local government, from places like the International City Managers Association and other places where I speak often. So I had that background in local government, and then I moved into, I won't dance around this. You're looking at a pretty heavy guy, but I used to weigh 500 pounds. So to give you an idea, I'm 268 now, so I'm about halfway there. I like to take credit for half, but I used to weigh 500 pounds. And Lee knew me then, John Hawkinios knew me then, you'll hear from them later. I lost weight partially so that I could go see the world, because I was from Round Rock, Texas, and I had never been anywhere. And so I wanted to go see the world, and so obviously figured out I only lost just enough to fit in the airplane seat. It's so, but I need to lose more, I know. But my mom tells me every day. But I wanted to go see the world, and I did it. I joined this company that was just starting called HomeAway. Now, HomeAway was later bought by Expedia and then rebranded as Vrbo. But back then, it was HomeAway. Now, what should make some of you so I would naturally, if I were you and you had a strong opinion on this issue, you might say, gosh, is this guy coming in from an industry's perspective? First off, it's been more than 5 years since I left. But HomeAway was a different business model. It was what's called an advertising model rather than a transaction model. So we just sold ads. We were essentially a giant back of the newspaper. And so it was kind of neat because the founders of HomeAway, Brian Sharples and Carl Shepard, actually hired me to essentially help local governments. I mean, they said, look, go in there, people are going to talk about the unique nature of their local community and make sure to understand them. You do local government, talk to them about how to achieve compliance. And that was the world that I came from. And that's what I've brought to Smart City Policy Group. We consult with different cities, destination marketing organizations, convention and visitor bureaus and such. Is Ernie here? Anybody? There you are. Hey, Ernie. I've known Ernie around forever and so many of his cohorts from the destination marketing universe. And I work with these folks on how do you achieve compliance? How do you actually build something that works? That's the direction that I come from. So folks, if you have never met me before, but you heard my background, you might say, he wants short-term rentals or vacation rentals everywhere. No, I want to make sure you're building good public policy and you're achieving compliance. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. A couple of the things I do want to mention, I've worked with John on so many different economic impact studies and housing and job analysis of how this industry benefits or affects or impacts different communities. I started doing something in our own shop. I worked with Jeff Coffey, who you'll hear from later, on something we call the cost of compliance study. What does it cost to actually achieve something that achieves a level of enforcement that works? And a reason I wanted to mention that is the driving line that I always think about that just rattles in my brain. Shortly after I started at HomeAway, I went to the U.S. Conference of Mayors in 2012, and they passed this best practice policy statement, and they said, local governments, mayors, they're organization of mayors, if you overregulate this activity, you're going to drive the activity underground and thus impact compliance. Compliance will go away. It'll become a burden to your local taxpayers to try to chase bad policy. You want to create good policy that will actually work for your community and will actually achieve that goal of compliance. And that's how I look at this, and that's the world that I come from. So as we go through the conversation tonight or after this discussion tonight, please know that's my view of this. How do we make something that actually works? I've really enjoyed getting to work with the Fredericksburg Short-Term Rental Alliance because that seems to be their same approach as well. I mean, I hear time and time again, they're talking about thoughtful public policy, but how do we do something that actually works for the community? Well, let's talk about that a little bit tonight. Now, we're going to start hearing a little bit of data at first. We're going to talk to John Hawkinios, who's an economist. Randy had mentioned that John's background is doing this type of work and working with so many different cities and destination marketing organizations. I had worked with him through the city of Austin, who has him on retainer, as does other cities, and then he is the go-to guy for local government on economic development and real estate-related issues. So we're going to talk a little bit about what he's found. I haven't seen this information. I've seen a lot of economic impact studies, and I will tell you the numbers typically shock you, me, everybody. They're big. And there's another number to see in there, I think, and John may talk about more than that. And that's the impact on jobs. How many jobs are impacted or directly touched by this activity? That's, typically it's a lot of jobs, and jobs are important to us here in small communities and of course from a local government perspective. So let's start talking about that a little bit. Let me bring up John Hawkinios. You guys are going to get to hear from somebody who's done a lot of work on these issues around the country and around the world. We're going to save some questions for after his presentation when we'll bring him back up. After John, we're going to talk to former Mayor Leffingwell and Jeff Coffey, and then we'll have John come back up and we can answer some questions. Thank you, guys. John, I'm going to turn it over to you.
First question, very first question. Is John smart enough to turn the mic on? Is the mic coming through? All right, all right. It's a joy following Matt Curtis, it really is. I mean, by the time all's said and done, I'm sort of feeling like we ought to take an intermission, have some popcorn, settle in, because Matt can tell a story better than anybody, certainly better than I can. I'm the numbers guy. Don't be scared by that. I promise it's not frightening. So we have done, at the request of the Short-Term Rental Alliance out here, we've taken a look at the economic impact of short-term rentals. And I have a presentation here. We also have a report. I'm going to walk you guys through it. We will take a look at some charts. We'll take a look at some graphs. We'll take a look at some numbers. I promise by the time we're done, you will say to yourself, I think I know what he's talking about. Even if, you don't have all the fine details, I think big picture-wise, we can sort of paint the view for you of what this really means. And I have to tell you, I am... Hawkinios is a German name. My wife's family actually, C.H. Ginther and Company, started out here, ultimately became Pioneer Flower in San Antonio. My oldest son's middle name is Ginther. I've been coming out here for 35 years, and I'm blown away by how much stuff has changed out here. It's absolutely crazy. I don't have to tell you that. You live that every single day, but the reality is this is not the place it was a long time ago. So let's go ahead, go to the next slide. This slide is a commercial about me. I'm great, thanks very much. Okay, let's go on to the next slide from there. One of the things that I thought would be helpful would be some context. And so these are charts looking at the level of employment in Gillespie County. Most of this analysis, by the way, is about Gillespie County because most of the data is available on a county-wide basis. And so this comes from something called the Quarterly Census of Employment and Wages. It's literally, they look at people's employment tax records. What you're seeing there is essentially in the second quarter of each one of those years, broken into two different things, leisure and hospitality employment and everything else in Gillespie County. And what you see, the point of this slide is 2020 is where everything fell down because of the pandemic. And here we are by the second quarter of 2021, which is the most recent data available. It's all been recovered. It's all come back. You know that. It's just data confirming that. I see all the heads nodding. Next slide, please. And so this is data on short-term rental versus non-short-term rental lodging revenue. In other words, folks coming out here to stay, some of them are staying in STRs, some of them are staying in traditional hotels. What's the breakdown? Well, as of now, more people from a revenue standpoint are staying in STRs. They're staying in traditional lodging. Again, you probably know that, but it's been remarkable to see the growth and to see that shift over time. Let's go to the next slide. Occupancy rates, again, this is both things together, short-term rentals and non-short-term rentals. Again, what we see is we see the dip because of the pandemic, and we see the recovery. And the recovery out here has been remarkable. I remember sitting around in Austin, where, for better or worse, I get my mail, and thinking as the pandemic was going on, what's going to come back first? Well, clearly what was going to come back first on the travel side was, one, places people could drive to, hello, Fredericksburg, and two, places where people could stay together in groups as opposed to having to be in a hotel, hello, Fredericksburg, and that's happened. The data shows that. We see that very clearly. That's never been stronger than it is right now here in Gillespie County in terms of tourism activity coming into town. As anybody who's tried to spend a night here knows, it's just extremely difficult to find a place to stay. Everybody knows that. Next slide, please. So one of the ways that's important about that, it's not just about, are we bringing in folks who are going to spend the night, spend money, finding a place to stay. They spend money while they're in town. Every restaurant knows that. My wife has had a spectacular time down there on Main Street looking at $4,000 purses, and I'm sort of wilting in the corner watching that go by. And so again, that creates sales tax revenue. Obviously, entertainment facilities benefit. Sales tax rebates is a term of art. It just means the city collects the sales tax, ships it off to the comptroller. They collect the state share as well, and then it's rebated back. The city share is rebated back to the city of Fredericksburg. So this is city of Fredericksburg calendar year sales tax. Look at this skyrocket in 2021. Again, that's the ancillary effects of all of the folks coming out here to stay and have a good time. Next slide, please. So how do you do an economic impact study? People think we're witch doctors, right? People think this is all some big mysterious deal. Not really. At the end of the day, and again, that's hard to read, I'm sorry about that. At the end of the day, you start with data about what represents the direct footprint of people coming to stay in Fredericksburg. I don't live in Gillespie County. I live in Travis County. So when I drive out here and I book a place to stay, I spend a certain amount of money on staying there. That's a direct injection into the local economy. We go out to eat, spend money there. That's a direct injection to the local economy. We have nieces, nephews, and other assorted little people around us, so we got to go buy some cute stuff. That's a direct injection to the local economy. We might come to a place like this, maybe buy a couple of bottles of wine. We might decide to catch some live music. We might decide to do a lot of things. All of that is the direct footprint into the local economy. The tourists come and inject money in, some of it on lodging, some of it on retail, got to put gas in the car, some of the money that's spent there, that's the direct injection. Well, that money doesn't stop when it's just spent there. The guy who owns the restaurant has to go buy food supplies. The guy who owns the hotel has to pay the cleaning crew. The retailer has to buy their goods that they're going to sell for folks. And so those are what economists call the ripple effects. Once you've injected the money directly in, it then ripples through the economy. When someone tells you there's a multiplier or a ripple effect of 5, go, it's bullshit. That's way too big. But ripple effects are real. They're modest, but they're real, and we can measure them pretty accurately because the United States government actually maintains a set of unique multipliers that allows you to actually measure the ripple effects of any industry for every county in the United States. I mean, I can bore you with exactly how the math works, but you don't want to hear that. At the end of the day, that's what we're talking about, so that's what we've done in this equation. So if you can go to the next slide. We started with lodging, because that's the one thing we knew we could get data on. I found a data provider called All the Rooms. I actually found them through the National Vacation Rental Management Association. These guys are great, and they literally scrape every website in the world and then clean it so that they get rid of duplicates and everything else. And as of the end of 2021, $81 million was spent in Gillespie County on short-term rentals. And if I remember right, that's an increase of almost $30 million from the previous year. That is an enormous increase right there. Again, I think you all are living that day to day in terms of reality, but that's clean data. I actually started this project in November. At the time, I had data for the first 10 months, and I realized I might have time to get year-end data. And I said, hey guys, can you send it? They said, we can send it to you up to the day. So literally, they could have told us what happened today by the end of the day. I just said, no, fine, 2021 will do it. That's good enough. Okay, so we know how much money is being spent directly on lodging, 81 million bucks. What about shopping? What about going out to eat and all that? Well, the good news is, again, the federal government maintains data that are called tourism satellite accounts. You don't need to know what that means, but the essence of that is they will tell you for every dollar in a community like this spent on lodging, 32 cents is going to be spent buying, food at a restaurant. 14 cents is going to be spent going shopping. I'm making these numbers up, by the way. 9 cents is going to be spent at the gas station, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what that pie chart tells you. I use data on tourism patterns. No, I'm not talking about New York City, and we're not talking about a place you're going to fly in and out of. We're talking about a community like this. I adjusted the data down. I frankly knocked the level of that kind of spending down to reflect the fact it isn't a big city. And so that allows me to then to estimate for every dollar spent at STRs, you're going to have at least another dollar spent in this community around shopping, retail, restaurants, entertainment, blah, 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 blah. Okay? So again, that 81.2 million, and you see on that bottom bullet point there, that translates into a total direct injection of just under 200 million bucks. Okay? Let's go to the next slide. So this is the real eye strain chart. This is the one where everybody goes, oh my God, what the hell is this? This is the way of measuring out what these ripple effects are. Down the left-hand side, you have all the different industries that are affected here in Gillespie County. Across the top, there are all different kinds of ways to measure. Output, which is a term nobody understands, is literally the equivalent to top-line revenue. So if you have a company and you make $1 million a year, you have $1 million worth of output. Value added, which is the second slice added, is your output minus your cost of goods sold. Let's say you're in the grocery business and your cost of goods sold runs about 75%. The difference is 25, say, 250,000. That's your value added. That is the local equivalent, by the way. When people talk about GDP, that's what they're talking about. Gross domestic product, that's the equivalent of value added. Third thing is earnings. Think of that as wages. This is how many wages are being paid. So these are different slices going down the balance sheet. And then the fourth thing down there, and the most important one in many ways, is jobs. How many jobs in this community are supported by all that activity we talked about a couple minutes ago? So let me sum it up for you. Next slide. Direct activity of $81.2 million in lodging spending at STRs. Additional spending, restaurants, shopping, gas stations, et cetera, $116 million. Total of just under $200 million directly injected into the economy, creates total economic impact of a little bit less than $235 million. See, not a huge multiplier. $52.9 million worth of wages paid, and at the end of the day, about 2,100 permanent jobs. 2,100 permanent jobs in Gillespie County, 20% of your job base, give or take. So I'd feel comfortable saying STRs alone account for 20% of your economy, maybe more when measured in dollars rather than people. And that's what I got. All right. I think Matt's coming back, but I don't know where Matt is. There's Matt.
John, that's really incredible. So, you know that I've seen a lot of these before. I have to look at one that I can see.
You want me to translate for you, Matt?
So walk everyone back through, because I know I've seen you do a similar breakdown with the numbers before, and I don't know that everybody was able to follow it. I've had to ask them a time or two, and I've seen these kinds of studies before. So starting with the blue column, coming down, and then work your way over.
Yeah, just to recap, again, the 81 million is what people spent spending on STRs, literally. That's the lodging spending. The $116 million is all the other stuff that people spent directly. And so literally on the blue side, the first one versus and the second one add together to the third one. And that's the total amount of money injected into the economy by visitors who stay in STRs. Then you get over the other side, you pick up the ripple effects, and it allows you to estimate all in the effect on economic activity as measured by dollars, wages, 52 million bucks in wages is not chump change. And again, 2,100 permanent jobs is a lot of jobs in a county where you have between 10 and 11,000 employment base. And so that sums it up to me, is that it's a very, very important part of your local economy. And certainly one that has probably more than doubled in the last couple of years.
When you went into this, did you think that this would wind up being 20% of the local economy?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you, I did. And the reason why I did is because I'd been here recently. And if I hadn't physically been here, I'd have been shocked. But having been here recently and seen what's going on here and seeing the changes, I mean, my gosh, I wander through here probably 5 times a year, give or take. I have a son who goes to camp. You guys may be familiar with it. It's camp for kids with special needs over in Comfort. And so my wife and I, a lot of times, will spend a couple nights here while he's at camp. And just to watch how things have changed, even in the last couple of years, let alone in the last 10 or 15. I mean, you could see it coming in the past. I was talking earlier, I was out here probably 6 years ago talking to then Mayor, I'm going to say her name wrong, Lagerhans, talking to Linda. And we were talking about the affordable housing crisis in 2014. So when we were talking about it, I guess that's 8 years ago now that I think about it, we were talking about it even then, but it's just gone on steroids. And I think a lot of it has to do with, one, achieving kind of critical mass, and then 2, the pandemic. I think you put those 2 things together, and I think you've just found yourself in a place where this is Northern California in a lot of ways. So.
And John, when you've done these before, you obviously are talking ultimately to a lot of different communities about the jobs.
Yeah.
That can be, talk to us about what types, how does the economy touch these jobs?
Well, most of those jobs, and you go back to the iStrain chart, which I don't expect you guys to look at, the vast majority of the jobs are in sectors related to travel and tourism. And it will be in retail trade, it'll be in services, it'll be in different kinds of accommodation, hospitality. That's where most of them are. But the money that flows through here touches everybody at the end of the day. It may not be the main part of your job, but if you're in real estate, for example, it has a huge effect on you. And the other part that I didn't really emphasize is tourism is one of the most revenue-intensive, words chosen carefully, industries for local governments. I mean, you have a relatively high rate on lodging taxes, you have sales taxes, you have motor fuels taxes from gasoline, and so this will have and then certainly, at least anecdotally, we know that a lot of STR homes are valued higher for property tax purposes because of their income generation. All of that has an impact on local jurisdictions out here, on the city, county, school districts, et cetera. All of it is a substantial portion of the revenue they need to operate.
And then just one last question. We talked 20 years ago about Roanoke, Texas.
Yeah.
About people walking up and down that, I've never been there, but the little street, and they're going to spend money if you can attract them. This money's being spent downtown all throughout the city. It's impacting the entire community.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this community, I've always been blown away by Fredericksburg's capacity to leverage the historic built environment here. I did an economic development strategic plan for Kerrville in about 2010. And in a lot of ways, Kerrville has advantages. I mean, they had the university, they have the river running through the middle of it, it's nice too, but this community has done an amazing job preserving its architectural heritage, and then leveraging, let's face it, your historic relationship with Admiral Nimitz and people like that. And I'm super impressed by what's been built on that foundation. I mean, I think it's been extremely well done.
Well, thank you. Thanks, John Hawkins. That was a really incredible data. Thank you. Hey, Jeff, come on up. So we're going to bring John back up in a little bit and have him available to answer some questions. We're going to transfer a little bit to two young fellas that I've known for a long time. The 53rd mayor of the city of Austin, Texas, who was the mayor from 2009 to 2015. He was elected. I saw that number, and I know how your mind works. Whenever they were doing the bios, it said 2009 and 2012. I was like, he's going to say that he was mayor for more than just those 2 years.
I did say it. I just didn't have a microphone to say it on.
He was a council member before then, elected twice to Austin City Council, and was very active in local politics and local community programs before that. Jeff Coffey is the former city council member from Buda, Texas, and was a hometown Buda person. By the way, Lee Leffingwell is one of the rarest of rare. He's a hometown Austin native. Grew up in Austin on Christopher Street in South Austin, and certainly still has a major footprint there, has a major foothold in Austin.
It used to be South Austin, now it's downtown.
Yeah, there you go. He went to the University of Texas. Does anybody know that school? Nobody asked, but I went to the University of North Texas. By the way, we can get back to the 1993 Denton Citywide Karaoke Championship. Thank you, ma'am. The University of Texas, and then went off and joined the Navy and flew C-130s in Vietnam, and thank you for your service. And then and then landed many of us safely as he flew for Delta Airlines. Thank you again for your service. You were the last pilot to land at Mueller Airport in Austin, or the last Delta pilot?
I was not the last pilot. I was the first Delta Airlines pilot to land at Mueller Airport.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Sorry, I knew I remembered that wrong. And that was, by the way, for those of you who know the controversy about how to pronounce the word, that was me trying to get Lee to say the word Mueller instead of Miller. And then Jeff Coffey from Buda, as I was mentioning, grew up in Buda, went to Hayes County Consolidated High School, right? And had a full head of hair back then. I can say these things, we're old pals.
I love doing these things with Matt because on average we have a full head of hair.
But then goes on, and no joke, I mean, Randy was the one who said it, but my mom talks about my favorite store all the time, goes on to help basically craft the entire metrics and do all the economic development work to bring Cabela's to Hayes County. Anybody go to Cabela's? I'm wearing 3 articles of clothing by Cabela's. Don't guess which ones. And then he goes on to become the city manager of Elgin, where he did something really interesting. And it was really a fascinating concept. Again, looking at Elgin from that economic development perspective, it turned out that Capital Metro operated a freight track that joined in the greater system of rail in central Austin, but it went out to Elgin. Jeff went down to Austin City Hall, Travis County Commissioner's Court, all the different entities that were involved in Central Texas regional mobility issues, and demanded that if rail was to ultimately carry people on it in Central Texas, he wanted that route carrying people out to Elgin. Now, it hasn't happened yet, but the reason we talk about it in Central Texas is because of Jeff, and he's the one who nicknamed it the Sausage Link to bring rail out to Elgin. Thus again, confirming that Elgin would be the sausage capital of the world.
Sausage capital of Texas.
These two fellows are, thank you very much, thank you. These two fellows are going to talk to us a little bit about good policy making and about some of the different adventures that we've all been on related to short-term rental policy making. Mayor Leffingwell was part of a former form of government that we had in Austin that was changed in 2015. Under that form of government, they created a 2013 policy that actually achieved what the Code Department Director, Carl Smart, said was at or near 100% compliance with Type 2 short-term rental registration, getting people into the program. Remember, I talked earlier about not wanting to drive people under the radar. Let's get people into the program. They had at or near 100% registration of that, what we think of as the traditional vacation rental model. We call it in Austin Type 2 registration. Unheard of. To give you an idea, Portland still suffers about 8% compliance with their regulations, and so many other cities barely even hit 10, maybe 12% compliance with their regulations. So they did a good job. Unfortunately, we have a new form of government in Austin, and they upended a lot of different policies. And in 2016, upended the short-term rental policy, later suffered from a lot of different lawsuits from a lot of different groups that took them all the way to the state Supreme Court, and then a lot of state action against the new policy on Austin's regulation. Jeff has also worked on the issue a lot in his post-city management life. He's done about 200 different in-depth analyses of different regulations around the country. A lot of them in traditional vacation rental destinations, so the Colorados and Californias, North Carolina, South Carolina, and so many others. He worked with North Myrtle Beach on the crafting of their existing regulation, Glynn County, Georgia, which is one of my favorite best practice models. They have a great success rate there, and many other different regulations around the country. So he's been very invested in the ordinances that work and, of course, those that don't. So we're going to just talk a little bit. I was going to have a facilitated discussion up here and then bring John back up for a full Q&A with you guys. So I'll just start it off. Lee, do you want to, I can tell you're itching. I've known you this long.
Yeah,
you want to say
I've
something?
been listening to you, and you said all the things I was going to say just about, but there's a little bit left. First, I want to congratulate you on your beautiful city. I grew up in Austin, and so I've been here many times over my lifetime. But I hadn't been in a very long time until about 3 weeks ago, and had a relative in town who wanted to go see the Museum of the Pacific. So I said, let's drive up there, and we did, and I was really kind of blown away by the way this place has changed. It is really a nice town, a town all of you should be proud to live in. And not to mention the National Museum of the Pacific, because this person I took up here, brought up here was in Florida, and she, of course, knew about it. And being a Navy man, of course, that was a big thing to me. Chester Nimitz was, I'm going off on a tangent here, but when Pearl Harbor was bombed on December 7th, 1941, Chester Nimitz was a 2-star admiral stationed at Pearl Harbor. After a couple of days after the bombing, he was elevated to 4 stars, and he was running the whole show in the Pacific. So he's a Fredericksburg person that you all should be very proud of. I know I am too. But, you know, Matt talked a little bit about compliance, and that's important for a couple of reasons. One, if people are operating a business like that, and it is a business in your city, you want to know who they are and where they are. And when you have a program that everybody complies with, signs up with, you can keep tabs on them and know what's going on and know where to go if there's any trouble. Second of all, it is a source of revenue. The hotel bed tax is paid by these short-term rental units, the same as hotels pay. If they were underground, you didn't know about them, you wouldn't get that revenue. So I don't know if John mentioned that in his talk or not, but that's another source. You know, not a huge source of money, but a significant source of revenue dollars that you wouldn't otherwise have.
You had a great line on tourism once about how you described it.
You know, when I came into office in 2009, we were on the beginning of a great financial recession. And so the big thing we all talked about was how do we recover? How do we do economic development in times like these? And of course, we looked at everything. We looked at tech. That's obvious. But one of the things we also looked at is the entertainment business, the tourist business. And I used to always say the tourist business is really the greenest industry of all. I mean, when people come here, they spend their money, you don't have to provide the services for them, educate their kids, et cetera, and then they go home. So it is really a good industry to rely on as part of your total component.
Would you have said that, though, some city leaders thought that we would never have a problem with our economy, that we would never have to count on our tourism economy in Austin?
Oh, obviously everybody overlooks the tourist industry, but we have components in Austin, components of entertainment that draw people all the time. And over time, people like John Hockenose can quantify that effect. In a city like Austin, you're talking about billions of dollars a year of economic impact. Not to consider the other extra taxes that you bring in and that sort of thing. So the tourist business is one that's a natural for Fredericksburg, being a beautiful spot, all the wineries, the Museum of the Pacific. This is a place that people like to come, enjoy, have a good meal, walk up and down the street and buy stuff and eat stuff. So it's definitely an industry that you should be, and I'm sure you are, interested in concentrating on. Put some effort in.
2,000 jobs, 2,000 some jobs. And I know I didn't ask earlier, how many people here are employed in some way from the industry? Great. And I know Michael, that we saw in the video at the very beginning, and Lisa. I don't know that I saw Lisa here. Was Lisa here who was also in the video? Well, it was a great video. So obviously it touches a lot of people, but then it also touches so many other people who are involved in all the different retailers and all the different programs, landscapers, housekeepers, and so on that are touched by this activity. So Jeff, you worked on this in North Myrtle Beach, and that's probably one of my favorite examples where you dove. Tell us a little bit about that.
So when I was brought into North Myrtle Beach, the city council had proposed a pretty draconian short-term rental ordinance that regulated just about every aspect of anything you could possibly do while visiting the community. And we went in and we did some investigation and we talked to the members of the community. There was an engagement process, but it was nothing like what y'all have done here in Fredericksburg, which is absolutely amazing. But in talking to the residents and talking to the community leaders and talking to the city council and mayor, we found that they really boiled down to a few handful of issues, mainly parking, trash, noise, and a couple of other ancillary issues. And they were taking a shotgun approach at regulating some basic problems within the community that were derived not just from the short-term rentals, but problems that were within the community. And after several months, almost a year of working with them, they decided that it would behoove them to amend the ordinances that related to the issues that they were having. Trash was a particularly troublesome problem because there was only once or twice a week trash pickup. And so the city is now picking up trash regularly in the areas that are affected by the short-term rentals, and the short-term rental companies are paying for them. The noise ordinance has been revamped and it's being enforced a little bit better, and it's a little bit more stringent, and that has resolved most of those problems. Parking, they adopted a little bit more stringent parking ordinance and they enforce it. But it takes a partnership not just with the city and the property managers, but it also takes a cooperation with the residents and the citizens and the tourists that come to visit. And I've found that throughout the country, if you educate people on what is expected of them, if you advertise in your listings that it's not a house party, it's not a party house, it's a place where you come to enjoy your family and friends. If you manage your property professionally, you have a local contact so that people can reach out and talk to somebody that lives in Fredericksburg that can address any issues that pop up. And you educate those residents and the tourists on what they need to be doing, what is expected of them. Trash is on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. You need to put the trash out and you need to make sure the lid's closed and it's all contained. Don't park in the streets. You need to park in such a manner that you can have emergency vehicles pass through. Common sense approaches, communication, and education will solve 90% of the problems. And then you get into the other 10%, which it becomes an issue of how much you want to spend and how much regulation you want to have to generate some modicum of compliance on the other 10%. And that's a community decision, but I think you find throughout the country that it is very important to make sure that you regulate the 90% and do that first and then see where you are.
So I've never asked you this question. What would have happened had North Myrtle Beach adopted what they were discussing? Knowing local policy making and seeing what you've
Sure.
seen around the country, what do you think would have happened?
So a few things would have happened. One, a lot of the short-term rentals would have been driven underground. A lot of the professional property managers would have been able to have a difficult time operating, so that you would have had some of these fly-by-night rent-to-own people that are renting their properties out and not really taking care of their business. You would have had a drop-off in the tax revenue. You would have had a drop-off in tourism. You wouldn't have had a lot of the problems be addressed because people just went underground. But the other problem that you're going to have, in addition to the drop-off in revenue that the community had and the city had, you're also going to have an increase in cost of enforcement of these ordinances that it would basically be ineffective. At our study, I believe we had in North Myrtle Beach, the enforcement and implementation of their short-term rental ordinances originally proposed would have been 16 full-time equivalent employees. And those 16 full-time equivalents are folks that could have been used doing things that really mattered to the community. They could have been taking care of the parks and policing better and working on economic development projects and making the community a lot better place to be, instead of trying to find the people that have run underground because the ordinances are too draconian.
So I may come back to you and talk to you a little bit about positions. We were talking about that earlier this week or last week about the impacts on individual FTEs and FTE hours. Lee, how about that? Overregulation, does it drive activity underground?
Well, it absolutely does. And when you drive it underground, you not only use the franchise revenue directly, but you also are involved, I believe, in more enforcement costs. Because all the problems, you'll be dealing with problems after they occur, instead of what was just mentioned here, educating people on what's expected of them, the owners of the property, so that they can educate the people who then become tenants. Another aspect of this is, you know, obviously I believe in local control. I'm sure everybody in this city does, but the fact is local control is subordinate to state control. States are sovereign. They have certain rights. They're at the top of the heap. Cities only have rights that are given to them by the state and can be taken away by the state. So that's something you have to be cognizant of. If you overregulate STRs or anything else for that matter, you can get to the point where you not only are you faced with oversight from the state, and believe me, Austin has probably attracted the state of Texas' attention more than any other single city in our state, so we know what we're talking about. But besides that, you're also going to be subject to jurisdiction from the courts. And I think it was mentioned what happened when the last council repealed the ST ordinance that we had in place. That was taken to court, and it was funded not by the citizens, but by I believe the Public Policy Foundation, which is a state NGO that just takes on lawsuits like that, primarily concerned with people's property rights. And it went all the way, and the city is on the other end of this lawsuit, so they're having to pay all the legal expenses through district court, through the appeals court, and the city actually appealed it all the way to the Texas Supreme Court and lost. So that's a big chunk of money. I don't know what the actual numbers are, but I'm sure many of you have probably dealt with lawyers in this room, and you know basically it ain't cheap. So you got to reconcile yourself with that. If you don't have an ordinance that respects people's rights across the board and tries to balance those out with the problems that might occur, then you're going to be faced with that prospect.
So the number, Lee, actually, I talked to our former city attorney today, knowing we were coming out here, and I asked her to estimate what it is. And this was actually kind of fascinating. She said tens of thousands of dollars in external lawyers, and they don't calculate, which probably you don't like hearing that, but they don't calculate the impact on the internal law team, the FTEs, because that's their full-time job. But they said certainly it would be.
Yeah, the city of Austin has about 60 lawyers, and they also hire additional lawyers to help them out with special types of cases. As far as the state oversight goes, I want to just draw a parallel for you. So it's very similar. Austin had also, when I was mayor, we'd passed a ride-sharing ordinance that governed organizations like Uber and Lyft provide a separate ordinance from them because their operating considerations are different from ordinary taxi cabs. And we put everybody together. You know, nobody is ever totally happy, but the idea is you get everybody just mildly satisfied. Then that's a winner, I think. So we had a good operating ordinance, which was also repealed by our city council after the fact. And that, make a long story short, they've got the bucks, the national outfits like Uber and Lyft. They went to the state government and they got a law passed which basically nationalized control and regulation and franchise fees on the state level. So not only did the city lose the lawsuit and get back to where they were, now they weren't able to collect franchise fees from these operating companies that they were getting before. So they went from everything basically to nothing.
So was the outcome worse than after the city or the legal fee ended? Was the outcome worse?
Obviously, I think that's kind of plain as the nose on your face. You know, if you've got basically the same thing that you fought, and now you're not getting any license fees off of it, that's got to be a lose-lose situation.
But yeah, I think what I was asked about was as far as the regulation, the ability to regulate became less, if I recall.
Well, yeah, kind of zero. Just kind of went down to zero. The entire law is now state law. All cities in the state of Texas, or jurisdictions, I should say, are governed by the same state law now. So, and as soon as that law was passed, here comes Uber and Lyft and everybody back to town. Everybody's happy.
So, Jeff, you and I were talking about the sweet spot. You know, where can you find regulations that achieve compliance, that you get maximum return at a minimum cost, so you're not throwing away money to try to achieve compliance? And we were talking about positions. If I remember correctly, when you were looking at North Myrtle Beach, there was actually an issue where they either wanted like a new parks police officer or some kind of police officers or a couple new
Yeah,
police
they wanted
officers.
to step up the enforcement and patrolling in the Parks Department area. And it would have made it very difficult to be able to do both of those. I mean, you're going to have to rob Peter to pay Paul one way or another. Right now, it looks like Fredericksburg has an abundance of wealth in terms of tax dollars. But you have to appreciate that that's not by accident, and it can easily disappear, at least the abundance of wealth can. So you have to be careful.
Right.
Yeah, and I want to we've talked a lot about the tourist business and how that was affected or enhanced, you might say, by STRs. But there are many reasons that people use STRs. We had people come in from all over the community and testify. For example, I had to go take care of my sick mother or sick relative for 6 months, and I needed a place to live, or 30 days in this case, things like that. And there, on the other end, the people that own these houses, maybe they're not using the house for the time being, but they're not quite ready to sell because their future is not all that settled. They have a way to at least make that property pay for itself while they're waiting to sell it. Maybe they can't sell it, but there are many other reasons to have STRs in place and to allow them than just the tourist business.
Jeff, one final thought, what's the goal? What should be you looked at so many different cities, what should be the goal after all your research on this?
The goal is, and I know this is general, but to narrowly tailor an ordinance that meets the needs of your community. It sounds like here it's important to have a local contact so that you can have somebody to call and address issues with directly and circumvent a lot of the bureaucracy, and just have somebody that can come down and take care of the problem and deal with the issue. Focusing on properties that are professionally managed and make sure that an appropriate level of care and management is being handled with your short-term rentals in the community. And, you know, just make sure that you don't take a sweeping stab at this. Don't take a shotgun approach. Take it in steps and adopt an ordinance, see how it works. If you need to do more, look at it and readdress it. But if you over-regulate right out of the gate, you're going to do a lot of damage that you can't undo.
Well, thank you guys. That was
Matt, can I just say one more thing? It is going to be complicated. It's going to be time-consuming. It's going to be detail-oriented to finally draft an ordinance that'll work, and then probably it won't be 100%. As Jeff just said, you may have to come back and make adjustments. But it's important to get the input up front. And this event that we're having here tonight is a way to start, and I congratulate you on getting everybody in, getting as much information, and build on this as you go down the path. And I'm sure the mayor won't appreciate this. Maybe you will. Work very closely with him and the other council members to keep them informed as to your ideas.
I'm actually going to go one more. Have you seen more successful ordinances or more unsuccessful ordinances in all your research?
Most of them are not very successful. They try to do too much too quick, and it causes real problems. Lake Poconos, I believe, is an example where they just outright banned them, and it almost undid the entire community and the economy up there.
Okay. Hey, we're going to leave these guys up here. We're going to bring John Hawken-Yost back up, and my friend Milton Buckaloo from the Alliance is going to help us with a little Q&A. I'm going to give Milton...
No, I'm just sharing.
You guys have to share a mic. Well, I was going to let you hold it.
Jeff, you do such a good job.
I have a couple of questions that were given to us in advance, some who were sent, and then we're going to open up for you to ask questions. As usual, and as we normally preface this, we're going to ask for respect for your position. That's great. Most of us came in with our minds made up. I'm going to ask you to just have an open mind, gather some information, and then walk away and think about, wow, I learned something here tonight. And I think this has been really helpful for us to see insights. There's nothing better than to look at other models of how people have succeeded. That's how we grow in life. So what can we learn in this community that keeps us together as a community? And that's our goal. First question. Some citizens are concerned that STRs are destroying our neighborhoods. I'm sure you've heard these types of concerns voiced in other cities, and I'm wondering, what did these cities do to address these types of concerns?
Well, to say that a short-term rental is destroying a community is a broad statement that isn't entirely true. There are adverse impacts that can come from poorly managed short-term rentals. But if you regulate a short-term rental properly and you address the issues that you feel are a problem within the community, and you can address those issues throughout the community, you'll find that the short-term rentals are much more tolerable and actually bring huge benefit to the community.
So, and I would say, obviously there are going to be problems, but it's kind of like if you have a bad neighbor, you would address that problem in the same way that you would address the STR problem. If they're making too much noise, probably they're violating a noise ordinance that the city already has, so it could be addressed through existing laws in most cases. Too many people parking where they shouldn't be parking, et cetera. Those problems need to be addressed on a one-on-one basis and quickly, but actually they're no different from if it was just a bad neighbor.
So what I'm hearing you say is that the perception of destroying neighborhoods is typically just a violation of ordinances that are probably already in place.
Correct.
The overwhelming response from STR operators and the information that the city got from them was they didn't even know they were there, overwhelmingly.
Okay, thank you. So to follow up on that, and John, you may want to jump in on this because it may have an economic answer, is how many STRs are enough? How many are enough, and what's the best way for a community to manage those numbers?
So you want the economist answer, or do you want the community answer? The economist answer says you go right up to the point where you can't make money, right? But at the end of the day, in a community like this, you're trying to balance a variety of things. You are trying to offer a complete package to visitors who come here, including a variety of lodging options. You also, I'll talk about, I'm sure something that you are all quite concerned about, you want to make sure that your cops and your teachers and your nurses and the folks who live here have an affordable place to live. And so there's a tremendous amount of concern a lot of times about short-term rentals gobbling up all the available housing stock and forcing folks to drive 50 miles each way just to come to work. Well, that was more true 8 years ago than it is today, Because in this community, and Milton, please correct me if I'm wrong, what's the average value of an STR for tax purposes at this point? $500,000, give or take?
Realtors,
Realtors?
is that about right?
All right, maybe higher, right? So to afford a $500,000 house, you got to have a household income north of 150 grand. You know, your cops and your teachers and your firefighters aren't making that kind of money. So the issue, it's a real issue. It's an issue in every single community I work in. Workforce housing arguably is the #1 economic development issue in a lot of Texas right now. STRs have moved past that in terms of where they're valued at. And so now what the issue becomes is you got to build workforce housing. You've got to find a way to build housing that the folks who provide the fabric of your community can afford. I didn't give you an answer on how many is really enough, but at the end of the day, to some degree, the market will work. And what will happen is you will get to the point, assuming, again, independent of regulatory constraints, where there's too many and people say, you know what, at the end of the day, I'm going to sell that house, or I'm going to try to find a long-term tenant because I'm not making enough money renting it out, you know, if I'm lucky, 6 nights a month, right? That's how the market works.
And let me say, that's not as easy as it sounds, building workforce housing. Given the legal environment we operate in Texas, inclusionary zoning is against the law. You can't say you have to have so much housing at this rate here and this rate here, percentage-wise. And also, and you kind of see, if you watch a council meeting, you might see this occurring, but it is also against the law, contract zoning. A council member can't go to a developer, for example, and say, if you will build a house here that's under $200,000, I'll vote for your zoning change. That's contract zoning. That's against the law. So you're limited in what you're gonna have to be imaginative in how you go about it.
Can I say something else about that? So when I was out here talking to the former mayor, we were talking about, I won't use the term affordable housing because that has a specific federal connotation, housing that workers can afford. And at the time, I said, Mayor, you got a couple levers you can pull. One, you could look at publicly owned land. So you take land costs out of the equation. Typically, that's between 15 and 20% of the ultimate cost of the housing built. Second thing is you can be talking about incentivizing people. You know, instead of offering incentives to companies to locate here, you can be talking about incentives to people to build houses here. But you don't have, per former Mayor Leffingwell's point, you don't have a lot of levers you can pull. You got to think about everything you can do to try to even come close on some of this stuff. It's not easy. It is a big, intractable problem. But in my view, that is the big problem here.
I heard one of our former mayors, who I won't name, make the comment in public one time that we've got to think about our working poor, like our police, our school teachers, and our firemen.
Nice. All right, I want to open it up to the floor. If you would just raise your hand, and I'll notice you, please. Do we have a microphone?
Eric? Thanks, appreciate it. My name's Eric Hammerson. I live here in Fredericksburg. I want to go back to the first question. The question was, people are concerned that STRs are destroying neighborhoods. The answer that was given was, it's false to say that they're destroying your town. Two different questions. So if you have a neighborhood, if you have a block that is a neighborhood, people have lived there, and you've got one family left, it no longer is a neighborhood. It's now a series of micro hotels inside an R1 residential area. How do you keep STRs from destroying neighborhoods in R1 residential areas?
So the STRs are a part of the community, they're a part of the fabric. And when I said destroying the town, I meant neighborhood as well, because it's all interwoven. And if you don't have the short-term rentals in the neighborhoods, if you don't have the neighborhoods with the residents, if you don't have a fabric that includes everybody, then you're not going to have the tourism dollars. You're not going to have, how many fine dining restaurants are here in Fredericksburg? And how many people are in Fredericksburg? I mean, there's 12,000 people in Fredericksburg and 50 fine dining restaurants. It just boils down to making sure that they're an integral part of the community and they're an integral part of the fabric in each individual neighborhood.
To be more specific on your question, hey, I mean, you use the example, how do we get to the point where there's only one family in the whole neighborhood? Well, the way you do that, and the way I think it's in most STR ordinances, is you can limit the density of STR units in a particular geographical area. That's one way to address that. And of course, that takes a lot of, the devil's in the details on that one.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am. Randy?
Here. Quieter than you think. Oh, okay. This is better. I was saying I have a 2-year-old that I raise here, and I love that I can raise him in a community with a group of friends whose kids go to school here. But that next door, my new property that we just bought is surrounded by B&Bs, and I love that he's going to get, like, if there's someone that brings a family here, he could meet someone from Dallas or Chicago or anyways. I just thought my 2 cents. My question is, did the economic study, did that include wine dollars? Like tasting room?
Implicitly, yes. I mean, we didn't go to each one of the tasting rooms. And what are we up to now? Is it... Shh, quietly. let's not air all the dirty laundry up here. 60. I was going to say, the last number I saw was 57, so I'm sure that's dated, but it is implicitly captured, absolutely, in that secondary spending, right? So that when you show up and spend $1 to stay at an STR, all the other spending I talked about, the shopping and the restaurants and all that, that would include spending money at the wineries as well.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Just a second. Let him give you a mic, if you don't mind.
Can I sneak past you?
First, thank you guys for being here very much. I'm Kelly DeCuffa. My question is, have you ever done an economic review, looked at the multipliers about how much money folks that are local who own STRs give back to the community? So I'm an STR owner, and I have angel funded several big things. And if this goes away, that goes away.
So the answer to your question is no, we've never formally quantified that. When I talk about it, I'll talk about the numbers that I put up today, and I'll say, guys, that's the icing. I'm sorry, that's the cake. What you're talking about is the icing, which is having people who are successful business people, and it's especially true in a smaller town, successful business people disproportionately give back in smaller communities. And they give back in a variety of ways. We used to talk about, you know, the most important business person in most small towns in Texas. It was the guy who owned the auto dealership. And he was in charge of everything. I mean, in charge of a whole lot of the community fabric kind of stuff. And so that is a benefit we've never tried to put a number on, but that doesn't mean it isn't real, because it obviously is.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I just have a statement. Our 2 largest employers in Fredericksburg are the hospital and FISD. Looking at the numbers tonight at 2,100 employees being funded by STRs, I would bet they're right up in the top 3 with the hospital and the FISD
That's
system.
correct. That's correct.
As much of a pain as the STRs are, if you are a owner that regulates and takes care of your STRs, you're going to abide by the rules, follow the rules. You're a member of the community. You are employing people that would not have jobs here. So I see our cleaning people, our yard people, air conditioning, heating people, electricians, etc. They survive this community does not provide a lot of other opportunities for employment other than tourism. So I would urge our city employees and our city council members to take that into consideration when they're making zoning and following ordinances that might decrease the number of STRs available.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I had a question about the noise ordinances. My understanding is that they have passed or are about to pass a noise ordinance that's very low. And I'm wondering what you've come across in other cities. Is there some policies like I have a noise monitor at my property that lets me know if there's a problem?
No.
Been operating for 11 years, never had anyone be called.
Right.
But if they can't sit out in the backyard, that could be a problem.
So there's a few things that you can do. One is to bracket it by times, because it's one thing to sit out in the yard at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's another to do it at 4 in the morning, depending on the noise level.
Right.
So bracket the noise level by hours. And another thing that you can do is the noise monitoring, because it provides an objective standard, and you'll know when things that are happening at your properties you don't want to be happening. Because it's been my experience that when you know about it as a professional property manager and your neighbor doesn't like it, you don't like it. And so the more you can be aware of what's going on, the better off you are in terms of being able to take care of it.
Do you know of any cities that have implemented requiring noise monitors?
Yeah, that's not uncommon.
Yeah.
Oh, it's, I think La Quinta, California, and I believe Henderson, Nevada, but I'm pretty sure it was La Quinta, California. One thing I do suggest, just I kept throwing a lot of compliments to Jeff for all the ordinances he's had to read, but I've been at this longer and have read more. And let me tell you, it's the last thing you want to read before you're going to bed. But the thing I wanted to mention is that to double on what Jeff is mentioning, putting that the noise ordinance in some sort of a regulatory space, I think is great. Making sure that it's included in the lease agreements. If you violate your noise, if we get called, if there's dings on the noise monitoring system after a certain hour, you're going to lose your deposit. I know my father would never in a million years lose a deposit because of us. So I just wanted to mention to consider that as well. La Quinta, California, though, was the answer to your question. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. Just a second. Thank you. We got a.
VRBO and Airbnb ain't going to back that up. Okay? If I want to charge them for bad behavior, I don't have anyone at my back. The platforms are not in.
Call the mayor.
They're not here. They're not going to do it.
I don't know if I can answer that question, but I think that the vacation rental managers could do that better than me. I think
there's somebody in the back jumping up and down.
You could, okay, here's one of our friends from Cozy Rentals. I do, feel free to come on up. I think, though, that you have control as a property manager to be able to remove a deposit, but she'll know better than I do.
Okay, you are correct. Airbnb is very guest-centered, right? Okay, so most of us are familiar with chargebacks. Oh, I'm Emily. I'm the COO of Cozy Vacation Rentals. That's not important. Let's talk about what's important. How are we going to make something like this work, right? If a guest violates a house rule that you've clearly posted, you can remove the guest. So what we need is to be in consensus amongst ourselves about what that is. The end.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks. Jason.
Hi, I'm Jason. I work for the city, so I've kind of followed a lot of y'all's careers and research and looked at the things that y'all have passed. We're trying to do things the way you've said. We started out with public hearings. We invited the citizens out. That was approaching last spring. We wanted to hear issues, concerns, not just from neighbors, but we wanted to hear from the owners and operators. The last year I've learned a lot about Verbo and management companies and things I'd never known. So we were very careful in our draft ordinance. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it. To kind of craft ordinances where we knew that these are vital to our tourism, to our economy. We wanted to find places for them to go, and we tried to do that. I think for us, the big issue is R1. It's always been the single-family neighborhood, and how do we handle those? And so as we go through, we know we have a big decision to make, and it's going to be based on a lot of factors: jobs, economics, code enforcement, and all those natures. I guess I'm curious, John, for you. I'm no economist, and I've tried to throw a hat around and crunch some numbers. So for me, when we look at just the R1 and we talk about the ripple effect for short-term rentals, what is the ripple effect for just the single-family home when you have a family living there and they're spending 7 days a week, and they're eating at the same restaurants, and they're going to Sutherland's, and they're getting their oil changed, and they're hiring electricians and maids and that. So we know there's a number that, 25 to 30% of a family's income is spent on kind of daily living.
Right.
What is the ripple effect on that? Could you help me calculate those numbers?
Sure.
Because we are trying to compare apples to apples.
If you think about it, Jason, think about it this way. Think about when you travel. Think about a typical Monday through Sunday living here and what your expenditures are, and then think about you're out of town for a week and what your expenditures are. The delta is what we're talking about. Now, I'll be honest with you, I just looked at the impact of bringing in tourism dollars, as if someone were staying in a hotel, for example. It's calculated in a similar way. You're right. If you had a family living there, assuming they were earning an income and doing all these other things, but I would submit to you that the weekly expenditure for a typical family at home is considerably less than the expenditure for folks who are traveling. So we could figure out what that delta is, but I think it's pretty evident that travelers spend more than folks who are just getting up every day and going to work.
Well, I agree. So I don't know if they shared that data with you. I'd love to pick your brain on
Sure.
it. Because we kind of took the numbers that the Alliance gave us in CVB. I think it was very similar. Every dollar of lodging sends $1 here, and then what's that ripple effect? And so we tried to recreate that, knowing, okay, if median household income is this, and it goes to this, and it goes to that, at some point, is there a delta where they are pretty close? Yes, especially given the housing prices that some of these homes are, it's not going to be cops and teachers that are living in.
So that's the interesting question. If you take away, and this is a broader economic development conversation. Let's say you don't have all the short-term rental activity. Let's say you're back to just hotels and the tourism environment that was here 10 or 15 years ago. Now are those houses going to be so valuable? Not just for visitors, even as STRs, but just for people saying, hey, I want to move to Fredericksburg because the quality of life is so good. Well, the quality of life, in part, for the modern person here, is in part built on that foundation that tourism has helped create, which is the shopping and the restaurants and, the high-end golf course and all this other stuff. And so it's hard to sort of unpack that. But what I would submit is absent the STRs, you have some version, at least reasonably close, of Fredericksburg 10 years ago. For many people, that's great. That's exactly what they want. But in terms of the economy, it's a different situation now. If you take the STRs out of it, it would look more like that.
So then you would recommend any ordinance work to not reduce those numbers so that it doesn't put a detrimental effect?
I'm not an ordinance guy. But,
right, well,
but what I would say is, and what these guys are implicitly saying is try to have your cake and eat it too, which is try to find a way to create a balance that through enforcement and through really understanding where the problems lie and professionalizing this industry, and hopefully you can strike that balance between maintaining the good things while also, mitigating the problems. I remember 8 years ago talking to the city manager. I know Kent's here somewhere. And I asked him, what's your biggest problem? And he gave me an answer, which he probably doesn't remember, but I do. He said, drunk bachelorettes. And I fell out of my chair laughing. So, I mean, it's, you know, this has been a place for a while now that people have been looking at. And I think, again, I think there is a path, and I'm not the person to tell you the details. These guys are more in your community is. There's a path to finding a way to preserve the value. I mean, some of the things, I notice you guys are doing things. You're building more lodging options here now. I see 2 new hotels going up on Main Street. That's great. That's a good thing. That broadens the appeal. It broadens your tourism assets. That's helpful, for sure. It's a long answer. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Hello, I'm Carol Hammerson. I've lived here in Fredericksburg for 3 years, but I've been coming here since 1974 when my husband's parents retired here. I'm concerned that a couple of things. One, statistics, information, numbers are really valuable. Don't skip those when you talk about the issues and the problems. You have a very educated community here who can understand all those things and help to make decisions based on them. So, you know, facts are facts. That's what we want, not opinions. The other thing is, you spoke about neighbors, and my husband spoke about communities where we've seen time and time again 80-year-old ladies say, all I want to do is have a neighbor. I've seen chefs say, I have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go into work, and people are partying to 2 and 3 in the morning. So balance is really important, and I love B&Bs. We lived in Europe, hardly ever stayed anywhere in a hotel. Even thought about wanting to open that because I love the interchange between people and ideas. But when you talk about, okay, it's a noise ordinance or trash or whatever problem, it isn't that you have the same neighbor who just irritates all whatever out of you. It's that every weekend you have a different neighbor potentially. I've heard mothers talk about when we chose a neighborhood, we made sure that there were no registered sex offenders near. Now that family lives with not knowing who's coming to their neighborhood every weekend. It's somebody different. There's no way to track that. So please understand the human cost of that sense of not community, but neighborhood. And finally, the last thing is a lot of people like us who've lived all around the world came back here because we wanted a small town, and 50 wineries are great. That's not something I consider an amenity for me. I'm glad to have it here because it has a wonderful impact on the community most of the time, unless you get the drunk bachelorettes. But there needs to be a balance that keeps that sense of neighborhood, because I can live in any community in the world, but I may not have a neighborhood there. And that is quintessentially what is so special and dear about Fredericksburg, that sense of this is our community, our German heritage. And there are a lot of elderly people, myself included, though I'd like to think not terribly yet, who want to come here to have that community, who want to have good things that don't involve the same things that I might seek as a tourist elsewhere. So respectful, consistent policy with how our STR owners and a few B&B owners and hotel people manage their guests is so important. And unless we have guidelines, it is going to be that every weekend it's a different problem in the same remnant of a neighborhood.
Thanks for sharing that, and I do appreciate your insights. What I would suggest is that's a great point to make to our city council and the people who are making decisions. We've asked these gentlemen to be here to give us insights and to answer questions. So as we go forward, I'd like to just ask that we frame these as questions, a question and answer period. Thank you. Jen, I'll come right back, Leslie.
Back to ordinances. In other markets where they're a tourist town or whatnot, when there are ordinances in place for, let's go back to parking, trash, lighting, noise, all that,
do they typically have those regulations for residents as well, or is it just short-term rentals? Because what I'm thinking about are the string lights. We have string lights in our backyard, and we love hanging out and having friends over, and we watch football, and we get loud, and we have a bunch of kids. And a lot of times we are far louder than the majority of STRs. So I just think it's really would be difficult to zero in on STRs and not the community as a whole. Because there are neighbors out there that are bad neighbors, but nothing is happening with them.
Right. If there's a problem, if there's a problem with the person next to you, whether they're living there for 3 nights or 3 years, it's a problem. And to the extent that it's interfering unreasonably with your enjoyment of your property, there should be some examination of how to address that situation. And I do believe that most ordinances that address the problem should apply throughout the community, because if it's a problem with somebody that's there 3 nights, it's going to be a problem with somebody that's there 3 years. The only difference is they're going to be there every night for 3 years instead of every night for 3 days. And so if you have problems in the community, address those problems.
Thank you. Leslie?
Sorry, I'm watching this Facebook Live, and there's questions that are pouring in on that too, so I'm going to ask one for somebody online. So Jim asks, what kind of fines have you seen that work to curb noncompliance with codes? Our city has proposed in our version 4 3 code enforcement violations in a calendar year, and you lose your STR permit for 90 days. He's asking, have you ever seen a city enforce taking 25% of an STR's annual income for 3 violations in a calendar year?
So there are some 3-strike policies out there. I think they're extremely damaging, because if you're looking at it in terms of a violation of the property, opposed to a violation of the property manager. Now, the property manager can do his best due diligence, and there can be 3 bad guests in a year, and they lose their license, and then you have an economic disincentive to invest in the community, and you'll see a lot of short-term rentals pull out, because despite the best possible management practices, there's no way to guarantee that they can comply with the ordinance. If you put the actions of the guest, if you make the property manager responsible for the actions of the guest, you're creating an unwinnable situation for the investor or the property manager or the person who owns that property who is trying to contribute to the community. Now, if you have a guest that is violating ordinances, they need to be held responsible for their actions. But it becomes extremely problematic when you hold one person responsible for the actions of a third party. And when you risk their livelihood and you risk their property and their income and their ability to pay their tuition for their children or their daycare or whatever it may be, it's just an untenable situation for that person. Hold the person responsible for the violation responsible for the violation.
Okay. Do you have another, Leslie? No? Is that it? Tom, did you have a comment, or were you just talking to me? All right. I love talking to you, Tom. Thank you. Yes. Okay, you. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Emily Baer. I'm a resident of Fredericksburg. And I cannot thank you guys enough for having this summit with the information that you guys have brought and the experts that we have here, I think is invaluable. Some things that concern me are, on Thursday, our planning and zoning and city council will be meeting for a work session. So this couldn't have come at a better time. My concern is we've had these fluid discussions, which I appreciate because we are getting feedback. We're right now on revision number 4 for the changes as far as what's being implemented or wanting to be implemented. We're now at over 100 pages. So my question is, how do we go forward? And instead of creating all of these new rules and regulations to instead enforce what's currently on the books, and let's start focusing and looking at affordable and attainable housing for our workforce. I really think that the city needs to take that as a forefront versus what we're focusing on right now. I mean, we do need that workforce housing. We desperately need it. And I really think that we could use the experts that have been through this before as far as, you know, helping us get to that next destination, if you will. So thank you.
Did you have a question or no?
Well, so yes, I do have a
Yeah,
question,
okay.
actually, because, so I'm going off of, again, what the agenda is for this work session that's going to be taking place. And my concern is that planning and zoning is scheduled to make their final recommendations to City Council. City Council is going to have 2 opportunities to make their final changes to the ordinance at March 7th or March 21st. We're right now February the 8th. So, I mean, to me, that's a quick turnaround time based off of the information that you guys have provided to us. How can we stop it from continuing in that?
Well, yeah, based on what you've seen, what's maybe a good time span to consider these things? I know everybody's different, but.
So I think that anytime you look at a sweeping, comprehensive ordinance to address the situation, you're walking into dangerous territory, particularly when it's a $250 million impact on your community. Now, that may be in the best interest of Fredericksburg, but I can't imagine that it is. Take incremental steps. Address the key issues and work on those and see if that improves the community and the quality of life and find the balance. But you can't take the whole cake away and then add it back piece by piece. You have to look at it and realize that you are absolutely dealing with the fabric of your community. And a 100-page ordinance that I cannot say that I'm intimately familiar with, and I don't know the details of it, but it sounds scary to me as somebody who would have an economic stake in this community, whether I be a school teacher or I be a property management owner or a property owner. Take incremental steps and see how that works and move forward prudently and judiciously, step by step, addressing the major issues first.
Thank you. All right, I think we have time for maybe two more questions. Lauren? Lauren? Oh, microphone for Lauren.
Hi. So something that I've heard from just all of this is that there's a big concern with new residents coming in. For example, you know, there's not young couples moving into neighborhoods anymore and having children and, you know, raising their children in this amazing community. But I personally found, I graduated from college and found that I couldn't afford to live anywhere. But then I was able to afford to live here because I have an STR on my property. And so I live in my home, and then I also have an STR within my, I don't know what the word is, lot.
Hey, thank you.
So I was just kind of wondering what exactly do STRs do to bring in more members of our community? What all do they, how do they entice, how do they make people want to stay here besides the economic, you know, values that y'all discussed?
All the big numbers we floated around.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
So you bring up an interesting point. STRs are kind of part of what we call this modern sharing economy idea, and Uber and Lyft are part of it too. And so the idea is you have an asset, in your case it's your piece of property, and you can extract more value from it, and that allows you to be in that space. You wouldn't be in that space if you couldn't do it, right? We see this in Austin. I mean, you can't believe this in Austin, right? I mean, in Austin, we are now we're hollowing Austin out is what we're doing. I'm lucky I bought my house, you know, in the last century. I couldn't afford to live in the house I live in today. I couldn't even dream of it at the end of the day. And so what we are getting in the major city is we are getting people driving until they qualify. Well, that's, you know, what is that, an hour, 2 hours in traffic? You're in danger of that here. You're in danger of people, hell, you already have it here. I mean, you already have it here. And so to the extent, and I know it's an anecdote, I know you're just one example, But to the extent you can find ways to help people better leverage the property they own here, create additional income, it makes a more compact community. It lets you live in Fredericksburg as opposed to driving in from Uvalde or wherever the hell it is, right? So.
All right, thanks. One more question, maybe. Right back over there.
Yeah, thank you guys for being here. And I think everybody is to be thanked. I think our spirit of this is to maintain our community, so it's not lost on me. My question is around the economics. So this is really an interesting community because we have STRs in the grid. That's what I'll call city proper. And then our county properties are not that far away. And so my question for you guys, have y'all been in a situation where you've done analysis or you've imposed regulations, and what has that done to STRs? Have you seen movement to right outside of the city? How does that impact the community? Because that's another thing that we need to factor into this. Thank you.
So I don't have as much experience with STR regulation per se as these guys do, but you've hit on something important, which is if inside city limits there's one set of rules, and of course, I mean, we all know counties don't have zoning power and all that, but you know, I was lucky enough, and I will say this in Gillespie County, I can't say this in Travis County, but I was lucky enough to be involved in negotiating bringing Tesla to the Austin area. I cut the deal for Travis County with Tesla. They deliberately did not locate in the city limits of Austin. They are right outside. They're right on the edge of the airport. They were very clear, we don't want to be inside the city limits. Yeah, and regulation at the end of the day. And so that's a phenomenon that happens across a variety of industries in a variety of ways. What one hopes is that that doesn't become a major element of someone's decision making. Someone says, yeah, okay, I got to pay some property tax in the city, but I get some services, but I can live with that, right? We're in danger in Austin. We've got to watch that to some degree because we are in danger of hollowing Austin out.
Yeah, and let me add to that. I think certainly one of the biggest factors in driving people out of the city and into the suburbs is overregulation in cities. You can regulate your city out of existence almost, except for certain categories of people. And I think you got to be really careful of that. And the other thing is taxes. You have to really work hard to keep your property taxes reasonable so that somebody can, in Austin can say, why should I pay $20,000 a year in property taxes in Austin and I can go to a really fancy neighborhood, Westlake Hills, where I only pay $5,000 a year.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good, thank you.
Say that again? What is the Austin tax rate? 53 cents. Well, you know, you've hit on one of my favorite subjects here. We really don't care what the rate is, but it's about 50 plus cents. What we care about is what is the tax bill.
Right. Okay. The issue here is our tax rate is 19 cents.
Right.
Okay. We are experiencing in Fredericksburg the exact same things that are happening in Austin, and it is inflation of property values. Yes. Okay.
Okay.
And so where we are in like the city element is we are limited by the amount of money that we can raise the tax rate every year. So we have to be very judicious about how we spend the limited amount of money that we have. We are different than Austin from the city as far as the city of Fredericksburg goes, in that our sales tax revenue is in our general fund is more than our property tax revenue.
Boy, that's really a good situation to be in, I think. But let me ask you a general question. This is my favorite question. What does last year's tax rate have to do with calculating what next year's tax rate will be? And the answer is nothing. It has nothing to do with it. So when you talk about the caps right now, it's 3.5% that the state will allow you to increase taxes, not tax rate, but taxes. So you might wind up in a situation where you could increase, God forbid, you could increase the taxes by 10 or 15 cents, but you still wouldn't be exceeding that 3.5%. The only people that can raise your taxes are the governing bodies. The city, the county, the appraisal district cannot raise your taxes.
Lee, Jeff, and John, is all the different studies that you've done around the country, John, all the different studies on the different short-term rental compliance, cost of compliance, has there been a city that has created new attainable workforce or affordability by restricting or banning short-term rentals? Not one. So in Austin, when we banned short-term rentals in 2016, how much more affordable did Austin become? Jeff, there was a comment made a couple weeks ago at City Council by somebody who described short-term rental use as semi-residential. Does the state of Texas deem it residential, commercial, and is there such a thing as semi-residential?
The Supreme Court decision in the City of Austin case deemed it a residential use. And that creates some sticky situations when you go in and try and regulate it in terms of the use.
So we're limited because pretty much every court in the country, every state in the United States has deemed it a residential use. Period. That's it. There are so much case law on that, I couldn't even come up with a number.
It's settled.
And then Belinda, you wanted to touch on just really quickly that we're paying, short-term rental operators are paying more in property taxes, correct?
Yeah, we've got a lot of people asking about property tax. We know here that we pay 25 to 30% more, the valuation is that much more on STR properties than a neighbor that doesn't have an STR. So STR owners, in fact, are really helping supplement property taxes and everything else. That's right.
So short-term rentals are paying 25, 30% more in property taxes.
So if you're a residential property, the appraisal district cannot raise the taxable value more than 10% in a given year. Taxable value. If you're a commercial entity, Katie bar the door, 30%, 40%, whatever you want.
Thank you. Thank you. Listen, I want to, we're going to wrap up. First of all, thank you for being here. This is fantastic. Good questions, good thoughts. Gentlemen, thank you all, Matt, for being here.
Well, let's not forget something. You know, I can't remember if somebody had mentioned it earlier. Let's have more data rather than anecdote. I do feel like there was so much incredible data that was shared here tonight, whether it was actually real numbers or the expert, opinion and analysis of people who've done different studies. But the big number that I walked away with hearing was the impact on the economy. 20% of your economy. It's the third largest or the top three largest industries in the city. 2,100 jobs. That's nothing to walk away from. For the work that Mayor Leffingwell and Jeff Coffey have done on different short-term rental regulations, Mayor Leffingwell, does over-regulating drive activity underground or not? Does over-regulation drive short-term rental activity underground? And will the city or private will NGOs like the Texas Public Policy Foundation eventually probably sue if they view this as an overregulation? They will sue. Okay, and then last point from Jeff Coffey, is there a sweet spot that you can find where you're able to achieve that cost of compliance?
Absolutely. You just need to be efficient and effective and regulate and manage the major issues and do it step by step. Don't take the whole cake away. Just try and tinker on the edges and see if you can't find a solution that absolutely works for the community.
Thank you. Thanks. And also, I wanted to just recognize our city council, our mayor, those who chose to attend tonight. Thank you for being here. Appreciate that. And those of you who are aspiring to a seat on the council, thank you also for being here tonight. All right. Randy, are we done?
I had one last question here. I started off with the goal very simply of to have an open conversation, so I hope we accomplished that goal. And the one last question was we wanted to inform and educate. Did we accomplish that goal? Thank you all so much. Drive safe, and thank you all for coming.